This is Ursula Foster, who happens to be a very, very, very good and close friend. But that's a recent development. Anyhow, Ursula has truly inspired me in various ways. I had the honor of living with Ursula basically for 6 weeks. And
Altogether, maybe, yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
in Virginia for other reasons.
Yes, become my brother.
Younger brother, please.
Oh. No, my brother was younger, so.
Okay.
Sorry.
I call
Oh, I assume they're younger.
While living at Ursula's farm, I was introduced to her book, and the more we spoke, the more relevant the topics that Ursula presents in the book became. And knowing that Ursula is going to be here to visit with her son, Isaac, who's recording this, it was such that I asked Gretchen if we could.
Oh, you are Gretchen. Yes.
If we could include a consideration for a reading. And I know this is not necessarily highly anticipated, but this is also Ursula's first such event. And so, in part, she's preparing for others to come. Some of you may have had a chance to either read or peruse through the book, so you may have some relevant questions. But I think Ursula should just take over now and expound on her book and her experiences.
Really, thank you for having me. And I especially want to thank Dan and Eileen to arrange that for me. And like I mentioned, this is the first time I'm presenting this publicly, and so you are my guinea pigs. I have another presentation lined up for September, so it's good I get some practice. I hope you. Yeah. So I wanted to first talk a little bit how the book came about, and I might have mentioned it to others. It's in letter form, and it did start out as letters. And at the time I was getting ready to go to Peace Corps, I was in an Israeli dancing group in New York, and we met twice a week. And we were more than just a dancing class, as you can imagine. We were a bit like family. And so when I told the other dancers that I was going to Uganda, they were very excited for me. And we had a very special person in our group. She was the oldest person, and she kind of always watched out for everybody. I changed the names in the book, so if I slip up and say the real name, you have to forgive me, but I try to stick to that. So one of the other members came and she kind of took me aside and she said, you let us know how you're doing, because Gerda, she will be worried about you. And so I said, okay. So when I arrived in Kampala, capital of Uganda, I was anxious to send off an email that I had arrived safely, and I quickly typed it in and sent it off. I was glad I had internet for that moment, and then I got an answer back. I was so excited, and I printed it out and I took it to class, and I looked at it again. Oh, there were a few typos. So I said, that was next time. When you're in a hurry and once it's printed out, those typos are very permanent. Yeah, so my next one, I was a lot more careful. And because you also, you can write without internet and then send it off when you get it. And so I started writing these letters home to the group, and then also to family and to other friends. And that became a regular thing. And I remember even you gave me some positive feedback at one time, which means a lot. Children are always very critical. Yeah. So and then at the end, I had all these lovely letters that had sort of documented my stay there. And so this idea about putting them together in a book, as well, maybe one day, how you think one day you're gonna write this. So there were other things coming up, so it took me like 10 years to get it done. So I just want to introduce how this book came about. And then there are like sort of three parts of it that might interest you. One is the part about Peace Corps, and you might have questions about Peace Corps. And then the other part is about Uganda. And then I thought the other part is about how to write a book. Because there might be people here who have some idea. Maybe I put it in a book someday, maybe today they go home and start writing it. So these three parts. So I'm going to start sort of a little bit. You all know about the Peace Corps and that it was inaugurated by President Kennedy in 1961 on March 1st, and it has 3 goals, and they're still the same over all these years. And Peace Corps doesn't go to a country without being invited. So it would have to be the country that says, yeah, we want your Peace Corps volunteers, and then Peace Corps negotiates what areas, for what areas, is it education, is it health, is it agriculture, you want to have volunteers. And so it's actually a very good way to come to a country because you have been invited and they actually want you. And there's communication about what you can contribute. So that is sort of how that is the first. So the first goal is to help the countries interested in meeting their need for trained people. So one of the requirements is always to have a BA, to have a college degree, to be in Peace Corps. And so that you have educated people to fill posts that the host country thinks would be helpful for their development. And then the next one is when you, as a Peace Corps volunteer, are in that country, to promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served. So people get to meet you, they might have heard all sorts of things about Americans, and then they meet you as a person, and so they get to know Americans in a different way. So that is part of Peace Corps. And then the third goal is what I'm doing today, to help promote better understanding of the peoples on the part of Americans, the peoples you have served. So you come back, and every year, the first week of March is Peace Corps Week, and returned Peace Corps volunteers go out in the community and talk about their experience. Sometimes in high school, sometimes in community settings. So those are the 3 goals. So that is the introduction to Peace Corps. You might have more questions later about it, but I just thought it would be good to put it up front. And so I picked some readings in case. Oh yeah, and some readings are sort of an introduction to it, and I'm starting with the piece. I have a cup of coffee here. I love coffee. About coffee, but it also tells you more than just about coffee. And I know I have an accent, and I will try to be understood. But if you have any problem, let me know. And oh yes, I think it was mentioned. I did 2 tours in Uganda. My first tour was from 2001 to 2003, and then I wanted to do a second tour, a 1-year program. It's called Peace Corps Response. And because I was expecting, I had grandchildren, and they were little, and I didn't want to go away for 2 years. I wanted to be back before they forgot me. And so I only wanted to do 1 year. And that's why I opted for that program. And Uganda wanted a response volunteer who had served there before. So that's how I got back to Uganda. I had thought it could be other countries, but I always went into Peace Corps with wherever I'm sent, that's okay. Some people, it's important to pick the place. For me, it was just wherever, that's okay. So I had written a haiku. I sometimes write haiku about coffee, and it goes, when coffee trees bloom, white blossoms stand on branches, sweet smells fill the air. And it came first time I met a coffee tree. It was amazing because, yeah, so tucked into many pages of information from Peace Corps, there was a short note that coffee might not be readily available in Uganda. Tea is what Ugandans typically drink. Not being able to have a cup of coffee in the morning might turn out to be the hardest part of Peace Corps for me. Therefore, a few weeks before my departure, I diligently tried to wean myself off coffee. Better to be miserable in New York than on my first days in Uganda. Even though Ugandans traditionally don't drink coffee, it's grown all over Uganda. Uganda grows both Arabian coffee beans and its native beans, Robusta. Both are appreciated worldwide, and coffee is an important export product for the country. The bush-like tree typically thrives in the half shade of other crops, mainly banana trees. It has small wrinkly leaves that remind me in shape and structure of elm tree leaves. When coffee trees bloom, tiny white blossoms cover the crown of the tree and the tips of the branches. With the slightest breeze, these delicate blossoms start to whirl like time fairies dancing in air, and as they dance, they broadcast an intoxicating fragrance into their surroundings. Coffee trees bloom during the dry season, when the land is bare and dusty. Encountering a blooming coffee tree always feels like finding a speck of paradise in the desert. Coffee is harvested between August and November. After the coffee berries are picked, they are dried in the sun. Huge tarps are placed in open spaces of villages and towns, and the berries are carefully spread out on them. In case of rain or in the evening, they are gathered up and brought inside for safekeeping. Later the hulks will be removed, the beans will be roasted, and the hulks used as litter in hen houses. It puzzled me, this dedication to growing coffee in a country that really doesn't like to drink it. So one day I asked a friend about it, and she explained that under the British rule, Ugandans were not allowed to trade their own crops, but that coffee somehow was exempt. It seems the Ugandan had found a loophole in a crop where they could make the profit for themselves. Since coffee is not part of the Ugandan diet, it is priced for foreigners. Foreigners who are not Peace Corps volunteers. That means it's expensive. Fortunately, I discovered Nescafe, imported from South Africa, and I always keep a supply of it in my house. How comforting. But I also keep tea leaves and chai spices on my shelves for my Ugandan friends when they come to visit me. And that's the letter about. Wish you could come over for a cup of tea or coffee. Love and peace, Ursula. So, well, it's about coffee. It talks also about systems and about colonization and how that plays out in weird ways and how it affects people tremendously. So that was the part about the coffee, sort of as an easy part. Are there any questions about it or comments about it, or? It's okay, I can. And then I have another piece, and that piece is about, I picked this down because you liked it and commented on it, and it's a letter to my daughter. So it says, Dear Elsa, that is sort of one of her names. Like I said, I tried to change the names because that's what you do as a writer, so that you, for privacy of the people. So, and this is about September 11th. Yeah, my dear Elsa, I get a bit emotional here. I think each one of us remembers where we were on September 11. I was in Kampala. I know every American person, or maybe almost every person around the world knows where they were on September 11. So I was in Uganda. It is September, but this is like 10 years later now, when I write this letter. So it is September 11th, 10 years ago. You stood on the sidewalk under the World Trade Center in New York, just minutes before the buildings collapsed one by one. Somehow you managed to jump into one of the last taxis leaving the area, convincing the already full cab to take you along. I'm writing to you from Nakasongola. It just happens that I'm spending the weekend here. What a coincidence. 10 years ago, on September 11th, 2001, I was here during my first Peace Corps tour, a decade ago. I was humbled and touched by the kindness and understanding shown to me by so many Ugandans. Friends and even total strangers would seek me out to show their support. We are so sorry, they would say over and over again at the time. At that time, the rebel war in northern Uganda was still going on, affecting all of Uganda and all Ugandans in some way. Their empathy came from a place of understanding what this kind of violence does to a people, does to a person. Memories of that dreadful day came flooding back. When the World Trade Center was attacked, you worked in an office building right next to it, and you were on your way to work. For many hours, I did not know if you were safe. It was almost impossible to get a phone call through to New York. Eventually, your cousin in Berlin got a hold of you and then had the presence of mind to pass the message on. Elsa ist nichts passiert. Elsa is safe. Now, 10 years later, I'm standing here next to the very tree and in the very spot from where I tried to call you. This was the one place where my cell phone worked. 10 years ago, the mobile network in New York was still sketchy, especially in rural areas. And you had to know the spot where you could catch it. This was our spot. I remember the protective fence around our little tree to keep the goats from demolishing it. It was a young tree then. That sense served me well as something to hold on to when the news was almost too much to bear. Under this tree, I cried with you about the horrors you witnessed, standing on the sidewalk by the towers, the very sidewalk that shortly afterwards was buried under rubble. Here we cried for the people you had seen jumping out of the towers. But didn't they know they were going to die? Yes, you said, they knew. They were holding hands. Here we cried when you told me about a college classmate that didn't make it out of the towers, who left a husband and a 2-year-old child behind. Here we cried for your colleague from the Middle East, who when he finally was able to get back to his apartment, found it vandalized and his hate message written all over his walls. Now our little tree has grown tall and strong, its large branches providing a much appreciated haven during the hot midday hours. The fence is no longer needed, and instead I find benches scattered underneath the tree for people to sit and to enjoy the shade. Somehow I feel proud of this little tree that has grown strong and beautiful, and I feel a special kindness toward it for standing by our side in those hours of worry. So this is sort of how everything is connected around the world, and how, it was the support of the Ugandan people was amazing during that time. So that was sort of how, we're a different continent, different country, but we're still connected. And so I got a bit emotional here. But I know that was an emotional time for all of us. And so I have one more selection here, which is very different. I was assigned to teach at a teacher's college, and my assignment was to teach math, but I thought it was to teach how to teach math. And I had done workshops like that before, and for elementary school, I thought that was something I could do. Until I found out I wasn't supposed to teach methods, I was supposed to actual college math. And that was sort of last minute. And I got some books, I got some algebra books, and I should have told you then he would have coached me. And I learned about the Khan Academy. And I took all kinds of books, and I started every night. I would sit down and I worked myself through this algebra book. And I found that instead of the problems getting easier, that got harder. So when I arrived there, then I found out the person that I was replacing had been an engineer. And I found some papers in the desk that was assigned to me that used to be his about the kind of work he did. So I told them, that's not, I'm not quite capable of that. But they didn't seem to care. They had other problems. And so the students at that time, they were in schools doing school practice. So I had the time to get to know the college and the colleagues there. And then I noticed that there was a computer room that was quite neglected. And I started to be there for the students. And so eventually I became a computer teacher there. And not only, and I also took care of hours for the students for computer lab. And there's also some more in the book, but that's just so where I ended up. And when you teach something, you really learn it well. And I think I managed quite well eventually. And the students also were really great. So the next part is from one of my students. So what happened is I'm a very progressive teacher, so it's all about hands-on, and you do as you learn. So some of those students had never seen a computer, and that was in 2010. 11. They'd never seen a computer, and they were like both in awe and a bit frightened. And some, they're the ones that press all the buttons and mess everything up. So you have all of that. Yes, so this is a piece about, and then I wanted them to get familiar with Word. And I told them to write a few paragraphs, And then I found out that those paragraphs they had copied from somewhere else. Because it's part of their thinking that what other people write, especially if they're Europeans, that's better than what they ever can write. Mm-hmm. It's sort of part of what happens when you're colonized. And so I taught them they had to write something about themselves. And then I knew that would have to be authentic. And I had no clue that that was a gift to me. I learned so much about the students. And so some of their writing is in here. And so that is the next thing about the students. So you get a sense of who the students were, and also I think it's sort of about what my role was there. So that is about, it was also very, very unusual for them that a woman had that position in the sciences. So I thought that was also a good example I was giving there. And so my German computer lecturer, it was on 26 September 2011 at 11 o'clock when I came from my computer lecture, only to realize that a lady was the one in charge of the subject. She smartly dressed like a decent African woman, showing that she loves the Pearl of Africa and that she was teaching the students how to dress. That day she started with introducing herself, home country, number of children she had, and the country she worked in before she came to Africa. It's always very important to share these things with people because that's where we connect. That day she started with, in fact, on that day she gave us insight in the knowledge of teaching by starting to tell us about the various parts of the computer, showing all the categories of learners they're catered to. I think he means that I started with the basics so that everybody could follow. Her dressing style. She always dresses in clothes with the colors matching and wears necklaces that look like that of Africans, giving me a sense of belonging. All her clothes were heavy like that of my mom. She has very nice looking spectacles that make me pity her because those having some eye infections use those spectacles. There I learned that she's a caring mom as she protects herself. Her teaching habits. Use simple language, simple words that can easily be understood by the students. English is second language for most Ugandans. They speak their tribal languages. She gives clear instructions to the class, follows the students' work closely, which makes the class to do the right activity at the right time, always on top of all of this. Sharing is the order of the day. She always tries as much as possible to attend to every student in a friendly way. One day I was doing something outside of her program, and when she came around, she asked me to open the folder I was hiding. When I opened it, she gave me the opportunity to use it because she felt she didn't want to deny me the opportunity to explore the computer. So I thought that sort of gives you a sense of the classroom and the interaction between us. And yeah, and it's also a bit funny. But so those are the 3 pieces I picked. And so if you have any questions about Uganda or about Peace Corps or what that came out of this reading, yeah, maybe what's interesting about Peace Corps that I was stationed in Gulu, and there also were British volunteers for overseas, and we met each other. And one time I went out with one for coffee, and I visited where they were staying. Now, Peace Corps' policy is to train you in the culture, to train you in the basic language, and so that you can live like Ugandans, and that you can live among Ugandans. So where I lived, there was no walls around my place where I lived. Next door lived a young Ugandan mother, and in and out. And it's because of the training, especially the language training and the cultural training, that you are safe. And also, Peace Corps has a connection to the community, that they said, we're sending you a volunteer, but we wanted to watch out for her and so I lived like everybody else. I had running water, I had my basins to do my washing and my laundry and my dishes, and sometimes I had electricity, sometimes not. I did my hand washing, some of you might have grown up that way, and on the clothesline and all of that. And so I met the British volunteers. They all lived together, a group of them lived together in a compound with a wall around. And it's not surprisingly, the kids sometimes threw tomatoes at their door. When you look yourself up, it's tempting, right? And they said to me, we envy you, that you can live among the people. And it hadn't really occurred to me what a gift that is Peace Corps. And it works because they do hard work, working with the community, training you well, so that you are safe. And you're actually safer that way than if you hide behind walls. So that's part of Peace Corps. Now, I'm not very good at learning languages. It's been really hard always in my life, and I'm still learning English today. But it's also really good for you to learn foreign languages. They say that, much better chance not to get dementia. So, so I think that's also, yeah, so it's you just have, and the people appreciate it so much. Any word you say in their language, it's like you see their faces are being so pleased that you make that effort, and you become more one of them. Yeah, I think one of the biggest compliments I ever got was that a woman said, "You don't separate yourself."
You were the only one?
In Gulu, no, Gulu is like a big town in northern Uganda, and we were 5 at that time, but we lived far apart from each other. Some lived right where they had I had to go back and forth to the university. They didn't have housing for me, but others lived at the school where they were teaching. But we got together once a week, and that was really good because we kind of could give each other feedback, and that was really helpful. And I still have some very good friends from that time. Yeah.
I'm curious because most Peace Corps volunteers are a little bit younger than 70. Were you
Yeah.
afforded any more honorable treatment and consideration in the Ugandan various cultures due to, in part, your age?
Yeah. Now, Peace Corps doesn't pamper you for it. You sign up for it, you're in, you know? They do a very thorough health check before you come, and they give you excellent health care. I think it was one of the best health care I ever had. And that was, those were nurses that took care of us, that has specialized in tropical health. So they were amazing. So in that way, Peace Corps, okay, welcome. Yes, there is, and what I really appreciated about that, you know, at a certain age, all of a sudden, you find yourself always with people your age. And if you're the oldest one, then you're the one supervising the younger ones. Or it's never where it's like an equal relationship. But when you all volunteers and you all get there and you don't have a clue, and you all learn together, and you all watch out for each other, it's a whole different relationship, and I really enjoyed that. You know, to really get that energy from the young people. And for my first tour, I remember we were gathered in Washington, and they gave us the yellow fever shots, and then they put us on the plane, and some of those young Americans fresh out of college, I said, oh my goodness, they told me about culture shock. I think it's starting here. And some had never been out of the country. And I felt like, this is not a college campus, is it? You know, so I had a bit of an, I have to be honest, a bit of an attitude. And then within 3 weeks, I just respected all those young people. And there wasn't one person in that group that at one time or another helped me out with something and was there for me. And that's also really nice. And I'm still very good friends with many. Now they have children, you know, and some have visited me in Virginia and stayed at my house, and some of their children have fed my chicken and my fish. And so it's really, many of the friendships you form in Peace Corps, they're really forever.
I was also inquiring about the attitude of those.
Sorry, things getting me back on track. I got sidetracked. Yeah, that is very good. Yes, no, you know, that was another surprising thing. Here, people, you know, we're not so important sometimes. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, not for anybody else. And we kind of pushed aside sometimes. We're not considered being important or knowledgeable. But in Africa, the elders are respected. And so in some ways it was easier for me in the community because I wasn't a young person. I had a family, you know, I had children. So it was really much, in some ways, much easier. And it was also really nice to be treated with respect as an old person. So thank you for bringing that up, yeah.
Is the Peace Corps the same now?
I think it is pretty much. Sometimes some of the administrative parts change, like how you apply. I think it's still pretty competitive to get in. I mean, I waited more than a year for that assignment and applied for many positions. They try to match you up with your skills. So it's still pretty much the same. Sometimes the countries, their serve change. That depends on political situations. But you can bring up a map and it shows you all the places where Peace Corps volunteers are. There's in Eastern Europe, South America, Central America, different countries in Africa, in the Pacific Islands. Yeah.
Okay. I had the advantage of reading the book.
Yeah,
I
thank
don't
you.
know how many
Thank you
others.
for asking the right questions.
No. I recall in the book that you had traveled numerous times in the buses
Oh, yeah.
on what we'd have to term uncivilized roads.
Oh yeah, that's a good
Yes.
one, yes.
And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, infrastructure, you forget how important it is when it's not there. And then also the weather there is really, really hard on the infrastructure. It sometimes rain downpours that wash out roads very easily. But that's another thing that Peace Corps taught us, to use Ugandan public transportation and to squeeze into those minibuses where they have added seats, and but with Peace Corps wanted just guys to sit in the middle. First of all, it's the safest place. And and then there's the goats underneath, and the rice sack, and somebody's holding a chicken, and doing these minibuses. But I had also really some very good conversations there, and people appreciate you sharing life with them. And you have a totally different understanding when you meet those people at your work. So that's, and then there's this one story about on a bus ride with another volunteer, and a whole window came in. And luckily, we didn't get hurt, kind of carefully put it out of the way. Driver never even stopped. Never even stopped. Yeah.
How long is the training before you?
So for my first, it was 3 months. And during those 3 months, you have daily instructions, and you live with a Ugandan family. And so you have instructions in preparing you for the kind of work you're doing. So I was in education, so I learned about the educational system there, about the history of it. That was one part. And then another part is cultural training, and there's also health training, because there's malaria, and you cannot drink the water unless you really boil it. And also you shouldn't eat on the road anything that's not been cooked and is hot. So you learn to take care of yourself. Don't go barefoot. If you injure your feet, for sure gonna get an infection. And so, all of these, because it would be very tempting. So if you wear the slippers or something. So you learn all of these things. And so it's, actually they help you for your life afterwards too. And so where were we? Help me out here. Where we get lost about transportation, public transportation. Yeah, I also learned to eventually wear a scarf, because one time I think I got lice. We were so close to each other.
Yeah.
But no problem. I just went Peace Corps nurse says, I don't know. He said, I don't see anything but here, treat it.
Yeah.
And then I was wearing a scarf afterwards, getting on the bus, and we were so close together. Yeah. And then when I went back visiting, this is the last chapter here, 7 years later, and I could have afforded to take a private hire and take a car up to Gulu, and it would have been just a few hours. But I wanted that experience of being on the bus with the people.
Oh.
And it was very, it was very important for me. But it also made me feel, that I'm really conquering things, that I can do this. That makes you feel good, right?
Yes.
That I can take the bus here, and I'm gonna be okay, and so, yeah. But that's a whole other chapter about infrastructure in Africa now, because there's Chinese does a lot of road construction there, and the people say it's not very good. The Japanese is better, and now Uganda owes the fish out of Lake Yoka to the Chinese, and it's never simple. It's never simple about the infrastructure. Everything has consequences.
My impression in reading the book was that the friendships that you formed while you were there were mostly with women.
Yes, it's much easier for women to have friendship with women there. Well, Uganda has polygamy.
Oh.
Yes. up to 4 wives.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my.
In many countries it still exists. We don't really think about it, how that plays out. And so gender roles are very defined, and you know, you adjust to the country where you live, and you, like they said, I was like a good African woman. And Peace Corps would be proud of me for students to say that. That's probably why I read it, because that's the goal, that people can feel comfortable with you. And if you have, there are some Peace Corps will just get in trouble with romantic relationships, and some there are marriages out of Peace Corps, but it can be very tricky, and so the women feel if you make very clear, you're very clean about it, then you can have good relationships, and especially with the women. Yet I still have friends there. I have, for my first tour, I connected with some girls in the village, and I'm still in touch with 2 of them. And I have to brag a little bit. One of them just now got her master's in engineering, relating to road building in Japan.
Oh,
Yes. She was working for a Japanese company. She had an engineering degree from Kampala, and then they sponsored her for a master's degree. And she wants to go into city planning. Yeah, I just hope that she can go back to Uganda and do good work, and that, because as a woman, it's also amazing. Yeah, so, no, so, yeah, and I have another girl that I'm still in touch with, they're women now. And I'm in touch with some of the people I work with in Gulu. And actually, I should tell you that when I told them that I had the opportunity to present the book, I had the young man I worked with in the computer lab. He was a computer technician, and he helped that those computers always worked. And I stayed in touch with him, and I think in Uganda people easily call you mom. So he calls me mom. He had lost his whole family in the war up in the north. So I was happy to be called mom by him. I was honored. And we're in touch, and I sent him the draft. And because also there are Acholi words, that's his language. And I said to him, could you please check the Acholi words and also make sure that there is culturally not anything offensive in it, that I want people there to read it and say, we love it.
Right.
You know, because there's so much written about Africa and Africans that they have no say about. And we know how that sometimes looks like. And so I think it's very important that I had it checked. And I had a person check, a Baganda woman, the Luganda language and also the cultural parts. So, and when I told this young man, his name is James, when I told him that I had the opportunity to present the book, he said, can you videotape it? Can you be there? Can you hook on to it? And they were so excited, because I think they appreciate that people hear about them. They sometimes feel so forgotten. You know, so, and they feel they have not a voice about even talking about themselves. So yes, I think some people taking here pictures, I'm gonna send a picture of this event to them, and they'll be very happy, yeah.
You
So-
speak the language, obviously.
I don't speak, I didn't learn Acholi very well because it was a very short time. I had to pass a certain level of Luganda to stay in the country, and Isaac should be here, because, like I said, languages are very hard for me. And this is like a scale that also for diplomats, for international services, and I had to have, like, I think, low intermediate or something like that. Remember, it's like when I failed the Luganda test and said maybe I'm coming home.
I don't.
Oh yeah, and he said, oh, I've never heard of anybody flunking out of Peace Corps. I did pass it the second time, but with Acholi it was different. I learned the greetings. That's very important. Always have to know how to say thank you. No, but Luganda language is something very interesting. There is no word for please, but they have many words for saying thank you. So when the children came up to us and said, give me, it seemed very rude. But then when you know there is no word for please, but they'll thank you for everything. They thank you for getting up in the morning. The first thing, thank you for your good work. I haven't done anything yet. You know, so it's very good to have this cultural education from Peace Corps, and those are all Ugandan people who do the teaching. There are American people there, like the country director was American, but the culture, the language, it's all Ugandan people. And about languages, I think that there might come a time when we really appreciate Peace Corps for having records of languages that might almost dying out, because they developed the manual for the language, and for languages that may be only spoken sometimes by a few thousand people. And I think that at one time will be amazing to have those. Plus, it's also this. They also record the spoken language with their test tube, and then make a little video of it. And so I think that might be something that in the future, because so many languages are dying out now, and these small tribes that, so that's just a side note on the language because you asked.
Ursula, are the younger generations staying in Uganda or are they leaving?
That is a very good question. Because, like I hope I told you about this young woman that I've seen growing up. I don't know if she's gonna go back permanently. That's another thing, that is such a brain drain from these countries. People become physicians, people become nurses, and they can go to England or even to our country, English speaking, and fit right in and get good positions, especially if there are shortages, and especially, let's say, in hospitals where nobody else wants to work, and then they're gone. I think there's always been the brain drain from, even during colonial times. The smartest kids were sent off to England to study there, and I think that's also a way, to keep countries down. When you don't have the smart people there to organize and get things going. And we have an African friend who was also sent to school in France. And he's here now, he's our good friend, and we love him. But that's sort of the pattern.
Are they learning English as
English
well?
is the official language.
Oh.
There are, I'm not sure, last time I checked, there were like 40 tribal languages in Uganda. And actually the Ugandans said it's one good thing the British did for them, gave them this language that they all can communicate with each other. They did say that. Yeah, it's a government language, yes.
What is the relationship between your parents and children, and how do they work as a family?
That is, yes. So, in the old days and even today in the villages, the kids stay on their mom's back pretty much until they're 3.
Wow.
Or on a sibling's back, They're always there with their mom because she also nurses the babies. That's like, that's the best nutrition for the children there, especially outside the big cities in the rural areas. So the children are very close with the mother until then. Siblings have sometimes a big role to take care of the little ones, and but then because in the old days schools were far away and you couldn't walk to them. Sometimes very young, they go to boarding schools. Sometimes like for 2nd grade or in 1st grade, they go off to boarding school, and we cannot imagine that. And boarding schools are not cushy. There's like big dorm rooms, now 3 beds in a row, very simple meals, but education is very important. Very important for the parents to send the kids there. Now they're on a trimester, so the children go to school, I think for 3 months, 1 month's vacation in the village, another 3 months, 1 month, 3 months, 1 month. So I think that's actually a good pattern for that.
Let me just chew this.
Yeah, yeah. No, answer all of that. If you have more questions
While
about
he's
it.
chewing, how big are the families? How many children are
Do you know, during my first tour, that was when AIDS really ravaged the country.
Oh.
So they were often, and it was the middle generation that suffered the most, like usually the breadwinners in the family. So they were maybe the grandparents and they were the children. And so there were an overwhelming number of children that needed to be taken care of.
I know that you proudly, in reading the book, you proudly maintained some garden space over there.
Oh yeah, the gardening was important, right?
And,
Yeah, but let me, just because I started talking about AIDS, and so there was a friend of mine, a Ugandan, she worked very hard on supporting the grandmothers, the families that had lost, the adults in the village, so that the children did not have to go to orphanages, because that separates them from their culture, from their tribe, from their clan. And the first thing people in Uganda will ask you, what's your tribe? What's your clan? And that's your network also for people from the same tribe, from the same clan, help each other out. So to separate them and to put them in these places where they have no connection is very detrimental. And so it's much better to support the communities to take care of the orphans. I think with the medication that's now available for AIDS, it's big difference, but it's still there. Only people don't die anymore so quickly. Yeah.
Is education mandatory, and if so, up
That-
until how old?
Glad you asking that. During our first tour, the government just initiated free education for primary school that is up to 7th grade. Free education, and there was a big stress to educate girls. Because before, when there were school fees, the families tried to send the sons to school, if that's what they could afford, and the girls stayed home. They also were needed at home, because they helped with the babies, they helped with the household chores, they helped with the agricultural chores. So there was this big push about, and girls have gotten education, which I also mentioned it in the book. Now, they're not the babysitters anymore. So the country also has to rethink what we're doing with the babies if the women have to do all that work. So, but anyway, no, so that secondary school, it's usually still some school fees, so not everybody goes. And they're like, it's a British system with A and O levels. I don't know which one comes first. So, yeah, I think with the highest is A or O. Does anybody here know? I think O maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah, and that with the O level you can go to a university. And that takes from 8, so I think it's another 4 years at least.
So you really have to have money in order to complete school, in order to go to university.
Of course.
Yep.
Yeah, and then, yeah, that's, and I think it's a little bit here that way too.
Yeah, pretty much.
A little big way there too, right?
Right.
Yeah, but maybe they're more, yeah, so, no, I remember that was a big push. And then when this was initiated, they didn't have enough teachers. They didn't have enough schoolrooms. Forget about books. Yeah.
So Dan, touched about.
Oh yes, thank you for bringing me back
about a
here.
garden.
Yeah, no, I lived for most of my life in New York. Yeah, I think I told you, 45 years. In the middle of it. I did find gardening spaces there, I want you to know, because I love gardening. I did some planting on the median of Broadway in my neighborhood, and I did the school garden. But I always wanted a garden, so I was asking for if I could have a little piece of land on the campus. And they gave me a big piece. But I also got some help managing it. And I think I also mentioned that in the book. When the war was in the north, all the agricultural activities died down because the farmers put in the crops and the work, and then this military group or that military group came and took the crops. And it wasn't always the rebels, I think it was also sometimes the government groups. And it was also not safe to be in the villages sometimes, so people would, especially at night, in Gulu, they would all come to town because there was some military and some police for protection. So that upset the whole agricultural system there. And they were, in comparison to other parts of Uganda, where it's very, agriculture is really blooming there. There was just bushy land and there were no crops. But 7 years later, when I went there, the crops are there again, and that was made me very happy. So it took some time. So when I wanted some garden, the school was very happy. They were gonna, oh, she can do it. All of you can do it, right? And they gave me a spot right in the middle of the campus so everybody could see, oh, that's her garden.
Oh.
And when I came back 7 years later, the first thing, yeah, we remember your garden. Yeah, so, yeah, that's it.
What is the hospital care like, doctor care,
Oh,
medicine?
very good question also. Now, I had one student. So Gulu has a hospital, I forgot the name, that was started by Italian nuns. It was probably the best, it was probably the best hospital in the region. And I had a student who needed some small surgery. And I kind of support him to get it because you also have to pay. And so we went there for the evaluation and talked to the secretary. I sort of felt in for his mother because he was away in school, the student up there. And we went to the hospital, we talked to the doctor and worked it all out, and he was a bit scared, but was gonna do it. And then I didn't know that, but I had signed up to be with him in the hospital and take care of him because you have to bring your own person and you have to bring your own food. And,
Wow.
And so it was a very interesting experience. So so I went with him to the hospital, but they sent me home. They said, you go home, we're watching. But I came back the next morning and I did bring him food. And then so that's a whole different atmosphere in the hospital. The families are there, they come from far away, they cook outside for their patient, and the nurses are tough. Yeah, no, that Peace Corps said that was a hospital to go to, okay, if we had an emergency. It was also the hospital in the region where all the emergencies were sent to. It had, I don't remember what it's called, that after an accident, that care, the emergency care. So that was pretty good. Also in Kampala, there are some good hospitals.
And giving birth, did they do it more naturally or was it in the hospital?
Yes. I remember during my first tour, I was friends with the midwife in my village, and there was a clinic there, and so she had very few resources to help the mother's birthing, and the mother had to bring their own water for being washed up afterwards in their own sheets, and yeah, and I remember one time I saw this mother already in labor, perched in the back of this motorcycle, getting her transferred to the hospital. I thought I wouldn't want to be that, And another thing I learned, that we have forgotten that birthing can be dangerous. And there was another young woman, she was expecting a baby. I think it was the second one. And then I saw her afterwards, and baby hadn't made it, you know. So the mothers don't always come home with the baby, and the mothers don't always come home. Yeah, so we sometimes forget how lucky we are. Yeah, and yeah, so that's it's a blessing to have the care that you need when you give birth that you need for your particular situation.
Ursula, you are fascinating.
Yes, you are.
Absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you could go and talk for another 2
Oh
hours.
no, I'm glad you're stopping me.
Don't take it that way.
No, that's very good. That's very
No,
good.
This
Yeah,
has
no.
been an honor to have you here.
Oh
with
no,
us.
thank you. Thank you so
Really.
much. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, a number of you already have her book, is that right? I have 10 books, so I think maybe we need to have everybody have a book. It doesn't have a book, and then maybe you would sign it for them.
I would be happy to
Would
do
that
that.
be,
Yeah.
instead of raffling, why don't we just give them?
Oh,
Okay,
whatever.
would that be okay?
Oh no, I'm so thankful for Madame to promoting.
Oh,
Yeah, no.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I thank you for having me.
Well, we
And I will greet the people in Uganda from you.